If you've always dreamed of writing a series, the biggest mistake is leaving book one feeling incomplete. I'm Zara Hoffman, founder of Inimitable Books, and today I'm going to be talking about how to effectively set up for the sequel without cheating your readers. Inimitable Books has signed more series than standalones, but the concept of having to write a standalone with series potential is true, because publishing companies are dependent on the finances of how book one does before they can sign on book two. But if you don't write a satisfying book one, there is basically no hope of getting book two. You don't want to hold back a bunch of information because you're saving it for book. Readers will only feel cheated and duped because they paid for a full story and only got part of one. Now you might be wondering, what about stories that are across multiple books? That is called a continuous series, and I will actually break it down into two different categories later in this video. But the key is to deliver on what you promise and then leave room for more. If you are writing a series, you need to think of your book's arc and your series arc. One should fit within the other, but you can't shortchange either. The Storm Gathers by Malin Holiday is the first book in the Stormfall trilogy. Book one introduces our main characters, introduces a prophecy about the end of the world, and then sees our three main characters essentially get shipwrecked and have to deal with allies, potential allies, enemies, and the people who may or may not fit into a different category than initially thought. By the end of that book, readers are satisfied to know what has happened to those characters, how they've changed because of the people they interacted with, and what has happened to them. But it doesn't fully address the fact that one of the characters has been told that the world is going to end. It also leaves another character missing from her companions, and that is a thread that is picked up in book two. But readers don't feel like any character got shortchanged in book one. They are just eager to read book two to see what happens next. The series arc is still a complete story, beginning, middle, and end. It's just broken apart. This is more true for a continuous series than a series of interconnected books, which is very common in the romance genre, where you might have couple A and then couple B, who normally has a connection to couple A in some capacity, couple C, etc., etc. Either they all live in the same place, you have them all connected to each other through personal relationship, a theme that connects them. You could also have a mystery series where the detective is changing throughout the book series, but people don't have to read a previous book in order to enjoy the current mystery of whatever installment they have picked up. There are older mysteries where there is no real character development from the detectives outside each book, so it is perhaps a newer expectation for that genre than before, where any book could be taken on its own and you need zero context and you don't think, oh, I wonder how they got point A for the character and then ended at point B, because there is no doubt that point A is point A. It's the third book, so it's actually point D. But for a satisfying book one, you need it to actually resolve. And I talk about how to do that effectively in the previous video on this channel. To effectively lead into a second book, you need to have answered whatever you needed to in book one, which again, I go into in our previous video, but then leave the door open for a future exploration, more questions, and things that were not wrapped up in your first book. The end of From the Diary of Agnes Yeager, The Secrets of Silverleaf Academy by Veronica King has our Eldritch Terror come back and wrap up the story for the reader. However, readers are aware that at the start of the book, both of Agnes's parents go missing. One of them shows up in the main story of the book. The latter is still missing. So readers are left with a little sneak peek into where that character is, and it allows Veronica King to continue the story, which she will in a future sequel. Some of the best ways to lead into a second book is to plant seeds for unresolved conflicts, bigger world building, secondary characters, unexpected consequences from the actions of book one, and basically anything that lets you continue telling a story worth reading. If you choose to do a cliffhanger, you need to feel like everything that came before that cliffhanger still answers book one's questions. Otherwise, readers are just going to be upset. Book one should also not feel like it is only setting up things to come. It needs to have a story of its own with a beginning, middle, and end. Again, it goes back to book arc versus series arc. I talked about in the previous video how you never want to pull off a Deus Ex Machina where you introduce a bunch of things that make this story easier for your characters to finish it faster. But when it comes to setting up another book in a series, you also don't want to introduce elements that talk about the next problem if it's coming out of nowhere. You don't want to introduce a new villain or a problem that has never been discussed or hinted at throughout the book. It needs to have seeds sown before it comes to fruition in a future book. Squeezing it in at the end might work for a Marvel movie post-credit scene, but it will not be in your written masterpiece. You need a character arc in book 1, but if they have no room left to grow, then that's going to be a problem for subsequent books. In The Gifted Mage duology by Holly Davis, starting with A Diamond Bright and Broken and the forthcoming sequel, A Shadow Dark and Daring, we have the main character Cadence, who has a power that she barely understands and is exploited for in book 1, at the end of the book, and leaves her in a bit of a precarious position. Book 2 is about how she has moved on with her life and is continuing to learn about her powers and how that plays into her self-worth. You need to leave areas for your character to improve, change, and grow. Each book's challenge needs to feel genuinely significant, not like it's just a pit stop along the way. You don't want to be pulling your punches for, I will save this for a future book, because there's no guarantee that future book is coming. World building is a great in for moving on to a future book in a series. In Down the Well by Veronica King, we have maps that are actually mostly covered by clouds. This idea was inspired by her love of video games, where many games will only reveal parts of the map that you have explored. But if you don't have a map for your book, that's totally okay. In Until the Last Page by Chantal Godoy, we have a character calling our main character a wanderer of pages. And readers might wonder, what does that mean? It implies that she's not the first person from the real world to fall into the book of fairy tales. And that leaves questions open that then allow Chantal Godoy to return to the world and explore it more in the sequel. It doesn't take away anything that has happened in book 1, but it implies this is not an isolated incident. It can happen again. It might happen again to Joe, and what is that going to look like? If you're a writer who likes to have epilogues, you can use that to your advantage. I talk about how you shouldn't be cramming in a tie to a future book at the end, and that is still true. But an epilogue is a great place to put seeds, whether it be from another point of view, a time jump, a different location. Basically, expand the world and do so a little bit more removed from the main story so that readers can see the aftermath without feeling like you are staying too long. For any cliffhanger or epilogue that you write, you need to make sure that it is not just serving as setup for the next book, but also serving the book that it is part of. Otherwise, consider cutting it and rewriting the end of your book to better plant the seeds in a cohesive way. Now, there are different types of series. There are standalone books with recurrent characters where each book tells a complete story. There may be a character arc that goes across the series. It depends on what you are choosing to write. It also might be partially determined by the genre you are writing. But it needs to be complete enough that a reader could go into an airport bookstore, the ones that still exist, and pick up any book from that series and not have to think while they are in mid-flight, oh, I didn't get the first book in this series, I guess I can't read this book. Then you have an ongoing series or a sequential series. It's books that build on each other and must be read in order. Each book has its own lead arc while advancing a larger series arc. This is the type of series I have been talking about throughout this whole video. It's the one that I love the most, but I'm also going to talk about a third kind of series that you might find yourself accidentally writing, but know that it is not one that I actually enjoy. Then you have a single story broken up into multiple books. Now, I actually initially did this for my debut trilogy before I then rewrote the entire trilogy and published it as a single. I feel like writing this type of series often makes each book feel incomplete, and that is what I've been warning against throughout this whole video. Nothing should ever feel completely unfinished along the way, because if I have to read the final book to get any type of resolution, I'm not going to be a happy reader. Some readers love a single story broken across multiple books, so if you are writing that type of series, you need to deliver on their expectations the same way that if I were reading your book, you would need to deliver on mine. Mistakes that I see in early drafts of books that are meant to set up a series are some of the following: introducing things that suddenly create a bunch of new problems but have never been hinted at before. They only appear because they need to set up something new. Book 1 only serving as setup for book 2. Over-explaining things. Info dumping is never good anywhere in your book, but you especially don't want to do it when you start laying the seeds for a future book. If I am only getting extra world building information as a giant block of text because it's necessary before going into a second book, that's not good. You need to make sure that whatever setup you make arises naturally from what has come before it and naturally leads into the sequel. It is a segue, it is not a door that opens and closes abruptly. Again, my preference that any start to a book series should be able to stand alone, so that if it never could, readers would feel satisfied with the ending. Now, if you are writing book 2 and you are trying to figure out how to end it to lead into book 3, but even within book 2, it needs to resolve whatever its main problem was in the book. You want to leave your readers satisfied if you never continued, but curious enough that they want you to continue. That is the sweet spot. The next video in this playlist, which was requested by multiple audience members, I will be discussing point of view. We already have a video up on this channel about how to juggle multiple points of view, but they pointed out that they want to know more about how to choose the point of view to begin with. First versus third, the different kinds of third, etc. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video. If you are planning a series or are in the middle of writing one, please let me know in the comments down below what's the biggest struggle you've had for the series creation. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.